in Spain.
Dear travelers, Taxi 2 welcomes you to the Principality of Asturias. We thank you for choosing our company as means of transport to visit one of the most beautiful spots in the national parks of Picos, Europa, the Lakes of Kobadonga, one of the most visited places in our country.
Lakes of Kobadonga.
Let us remind you that this mountain range was the first protected space in our country, belonging to the National Park of the Mountain of Kobadonga, declared a protected space in 1918, including the western massif of Picos de Europa. In 1995, by declaring the current national park of Picos de Europa, the protection was extended to the central and eastern massifs, including, due to the quality and preservation state, the valleys of Sajambre, Valdeón and Camaleño, having the park a surface greater than 64,000 hectares. Nowadays, the National Park of Picos Europa is one of the 13 protected natural spaces within the network of national parks in Spain, representing an ecosystem associated to Atlantic woods with the presence of geological formations of mountain limestone. It is exactly this geological aspect which is least well known and may be the most important part of this park, as it constitutes one of the most complex karstic systems in the world, with a great number of caves and great development abysses, having among them some of the deepest ones in the planet. On the whole, there are more than 1,000 explored cavities, forming a complex fluvial and subterranean network made from rainwater being filtered at high altitude and later appearing plentiful in the lower coast. On the surface, the park is full of capricious formations derived from karstic erosion, generating a labyrinthic landscape hard to go by. This is shown mainly at medium and high altitude, with the presence of lapid fields, eroded rocks with capricious shapes, gully washers at the foot of scraped peaks, or closed valleys known as holes or dolinas, which happen one next to the other, giving the environment its unique beauty and spectacular nature. Frozen water has eroded the rock, originating rounded fertile plains at a lower altitude. The flow of this water has chiseled deep and narrow gorges, which contribute to enhance even more the great and majestic summits. But not all the landscape in Picos de Europa is rugged. Thick woods flourish along the hillsides, as well as dense bushes and extensive prairies. The humid and warm climate is typical of the Cantabrian area, characterized by those rainy days which have formed the typical foggy weather, borrina or encainada, which is the worst enemy man can be faced with. At certain altitude, it is normal to find the summits clean of fog, emerging over the sea of clouds under a clean blue sky. The humidity which extends the fog over the valleys within the park favors vegetable explosion, which calms down the toughness of the mountains, as well as it serves as shelter and food for a rich and varied fauna. and remembers of Picos, Europa, is always full of the intense green associated to prairies, wisely profited by the mountain cattle, practiced since ancient times. The vegetation varies from the valleys to the summits, from the riverbanks to the gorges, from the prairies to the underwood, nearly always with Atlantic influence, being plenty of deciduous woodland, beeches, oaks, chestnut trees, ash trees, lime trees, walnut trees, maple trees or hazelnut trees, among others. Both the wildlife in Picos, Europa and its ecosystems are plentiful and varied. The greatest number of animal species live under cover of warm woods, where there are multiple insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds and small mammals, and even some bigger ones such as steers, roebucks, foxes, wild boars or badgers. Boundaries live more elusive species such as the bear or the wolf. Among the bigger birds, we have to highlight the capercaillie. Over the woods, we enter the domain of the chamois, whose Cantabrian subspecies has in Picos, Europa its greatest reserve. The chamois has perfectly adapted to the difficult orography of these mountains, becoming the mammal which best moves on these rocky mountains. Within the park, there are also plenty of birds of prey, standing out among them the golden eagle, the griffon vulture, the kestrel, the Egyptian vulture, the goshawk, the buzzard, and after decades of absence, the pleasant and hoped-for visit of the birded vulture. However, the National Park of Picos, Europa is also a protected space where there are villages whose inhabitants are an example of wisdom, survival and adaptation to a way of life which suits perfectly the modern concept of sustainability. In this lush and wild nature, the human being has modified the landscape in a way that the preservation of natural and traditional values live together to enrich the landscape, the biodiversity and the culture. The villages around the park, as well as those inside, preserve ways of life and customs in harmony with nature. Supported on the knowledge transmitted from parents to their children, the human being has stamped its footprints on these landscapes along the centuries, transforming some part of them to obtain resources in a sensible way, obtaining pasture for the cattle, shelter for their houses, and spaces to live. Simultaneously, the relief has also conditioned the human life. For centuries, some villages have remained practically isolated from the rest of the world, surviving thanks to their knowledge of the environment. The men and women in Picos have a supreme respect for the nature, and a good example of this is the adaptation of the cattle farming to the natural cycles. After the winter, between April and October, the cattle go up to the mountain passes to graze the high-quality grass grown there. The first to go are the cows, followed by the sheep and the goats. Meanwhile, in the lower valleys, the fields are mowed to store the grass to feed the animals during the winter, when they come down from the mountains.
Wow! Parang nagsakay tayo ng
In
airplane.
times of calf feeding and refugia, kid and lamb,
Very nice
milk
place.
is obtained from cows, sheep and goats to make the precious cheese from Picos, Europa, famous for their multiple varieties which range from the softer textures to the hardest and strongest flavors due to their fermentation in caves. On the Asturian side, we find cheeses of great quality and fame, such as Gamonedo, Cabrales, Peñamellera, and Bello.
No, poco ya.
However, we cannot forget those made around the park in the provinces bordering León and Cantabria, such as Valdeón, Sajambre, Áliva, Liébana, Vejes or Trespiso. During the itinerary, we can see the shepherds' huts, where these cheeses are made. The shepherds in Picos, Europa, have been granted with the Prince of Asturias award.
An eagle.
The area of the itinerary has two spots of maximum interest for the visitor. The sanctuary of Kobadonga at the entrance of the national park, and higher up the lakes of Enol and Ercina at the foot of Picos de Europa, Peña Santa.
Parang snow, bato pala.
It was a monk
See
from
how's the
Asturias,
creation
Mr.
of
Pedro
God.
Vidal, Marquis of Villaviciosa, who
Very
knowing the
nice.
need to preserve these places, inspired the law of national parks in 1916.
La imagen que el visitante capta y recuerda de los picos de Europa está siempre teñida de verdes intensos, asociados a praderías sabiamente aprovechadas por una ganadería de montaña que se practica desde tiempos remotos. La vegetación varía de los valles a las cumbres, de las riberas a los desfiladeros, de las graderías al sotobosque. Casi